You're listening to Art Crush with artist Fee Marks and myself, artist Paula Telizyn, and
Hi.
we're going to talk with Fee Marks about her art practice, what she's trying to do, and why she is obsessed with women.
Who wouldn't be?
Well, yes, there is that, but your art predominantly features women from history, women from literature, and women who are not quite fully human. Um, so there's definitely an angle here. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your inspiration and why you even started with this?
Okay, well, basically, it comes from giving women a voice. I think that was sort of like the title of one of my first exhibitions. And I think it was working with you, Paula, to be honest, when we had to look at the why. Why do you make art? And from that, it sort of evolved into the idea that there were these women in history and in literature and mythology who we are given we have been given a very male view of. I know that interestingly, this has definitely been picked up with authors, which has been great because it helped me hugely to read lots of books where women have written the stories from the point of view of women and changed the narrative. And so that was my idea. I'm very much into storytelling. And I think it was just like these women deserve to be heard. And the more I read and the more I researched, and understood how much fake news has been around since the year dot, it just made me want to celebrate these women and give a different point of view to their stories, because often the women weren't even literate, so couldn't even write down in diaries or what they thought, or they don't exist, or they've been destroyed. So we're basically starting from a 0 point.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting too because I hadn't thought about, which I think a lot of people don't, how women are effectively erased, even though we're in plain sight, until I started actually talking to you in depth. And going over the things you were passionate about, and like I'm sitting in front of a painting of Morgan Le Fay, and I love the story of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. It was one of my teenage sort of obsessions. I read all of the various forms of the stories, and Morgan was always treated really poorly, and you retold her story in a way that when you painted her, I was like, that's mine, that's my painting right there. uh, and it reminds me that we often, even in literature, are not given a fair shake at all. It's kind of like, oh, the woman tempted, the woman did this, or the woman was, the sign of evil or whatever, and we don't think about what's going on in her world and how is she functioning within the
Exactly, and
limitations.
all these originate from men. I
Yeah.
mean, if you particularly look at religious stories, the Bible was written by men to explain about Christianity and to explain about certain stories, and this idea that the women, all goes back to this poor woman called Eve, who, who because she didn't do as she was told once, that is why we have all the things that are wrong with our lives as women. I mean, it's absolutely bonkers. And yet, that's what people have sort of believed. And then you look a bit further and you find all these other women in the background and different stories, because there is also this idea that there were stories written by women and there were different versions, but not even when there has been, they've been destroyed. So, because it didn't toe the line of the power of the men in politically and religiously. And so they cherry picked what they wanted the general populace to believe and know. And then when you get a bit later on, for example, one of my favorites is Marie Antoinette. When you look at her life and her story, it is so not what people know, and yet still people will condemn her as the person who caused the French Revolution. You know, she was a foreigner. She was an easy scapegoat for the news sheets to take and say, oh, it's all the fault of Marie Antoinette because she's Austrian and she's a woman. And yet there are stories, and still when you say to people, well, did you know she set up homes in Paris for unmarried mothers? Nobody knows about it. They still just know the let them eat cake
Yeah.
quote, and that
Yeah.
she had her head chopped off.
Exactly. She was an easy scapegoat. I'm still mulling over, like I'd finished the book Mrs. Van Gogh last week, and I'm still thinking about it because we don't I mean, granted, it's a fiction based on reality, so we have to acknowledge that there was a lot of the author sort of came up with some of the situations, whatever. But the reality is, it Van Gogh didn't die, and his work became famous, which is the story
No.
everybody has. I've got to die before my art becomes well known. It was the
Yeah, that's
actions.
where the myth came from, wasn't it?
Yeah, they erased the woman. The actions
Mm.
of a woman who spent 2 years trying to get his work into shows after he had passed, after his brother had passed. You know, she was grieving. She was a single parent, and she's trying to do something with these 2,000 plus pieces of artwork that she
Mm.
suddenly got. But
And
we don't do that.
there is nobody that compares with Joanna. I mean, you know, there are no other stories that I've come across as yet of a woman promoting and marketing art and having the success that she has had. You know, it is absolutely crazy. And even though, you know, as you say, the book is fiction, I mean, when we look at historical, you know, finding the facts amongst opinion is very, very difficult. I mean, obviously now that's why we have the disclaimer, you know, this is not, I'm not saying this is exactly what she was like and this is, but in the past, those disclaimers have never been there. So people have just taken them as absolute fact.
Hmm.
And when you look at Shakespeare and his treatment of women and also historical characters, I mean, I know I'm going off a bit because I am talking about men, but it was like to flatter the monarchy at the time. So Richard III became the evil hunchback king that they almost like laughed at because he was the one who was against the Tudors, and it was flattering for them. So if you look at anything historically, it's been altered to fit the view that they want to portray,
Mm.
and more so with women.
Yeah. I mean, this is a hell of a mission to be on, and I think it's I don't want to say a noble one, but it's certainly a really good one to be on with your art, to have the sense of what you are trying to do. You're not fighting the patriarchy as much as you are educating people who care to take a second look and maybe reevaluate the way that they think about the roles of women in society, how we're treated, how we're written about, and how we're spoken about. So you've painted gotta be hundreds of paintings at this point. Do you?
Yeah, I think so. I'll have to do a count at some point.
Yeah. So in all the paintings that you made, and I know your favorite is the current one you're working on, but is there a story of a woman that has stood out to you that you wanted to go back and revisit, or that you that sort of keeps you going when you sort of think I could be doing anything else?
Well, I think there's so many. I think it's really, really hard to pick one. And as I said earlier, I am very influenced by what I read. And I mean, the one that, I mean, she's not. she's infamous. I mean, she's not forgotten about. But when you think of somebody like Anne Boleyn, there is an amazing book, and I cannot for the life of me remember the author at the moment, but it's called 500 Years of Lies. And it is a historical book basically dispelling everything you thought you knew about Anne Boleyn and turning it on its head. And the more you look into these women, the more fascinating to me they become as people, and what they went through. There's also the artists that I've painted who, when you hear people moaning about art, the art world today, you think, well, try and be in 15th century Italy, trying to be a professional artist as a woman. And having your hand damaged and have being raped and having all these other things happen to you, and yet the women manage to do this. So I just find all the stories generally so inspiring, because we never know when, how we are going to behave when put in very dire situations, in a life and death situation. And these women are put in that position and they rise. And to say, even you don't have to even go very far back in history to find women, and even women today who are still being pushed to the sidelines. And that's where the doing portraits of women today, doing commissions, I just love hearing women's stories and what they've been through, because there is no woman, I mean, who has not gone, who has not, lived and gone through a lot in their lives. It's, they might not talk about it. They might just brush it under the carpet, or, pretend they're focusing on their family and this, that, and the other, but they will have gone through the mill.
Yeah.
It's not, that's what I've discovered. There isn't anybody you think has had a blessed life. You don't know their story.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly. One of the things I was just thinking about as you were talking is how women are portrayed by other artists, by male artists, and the male gaze, which doesn't show up in your art at all. You don't sensualize women, you don't treat them as objects. They're existing in the worlds you create for them, a lot of times unaware of the artist who's captured them, right? Like they're not aware of the lens that you've put them under, like in some of your latest paintings, there's a lot of movement and everything, but the women are just being women, which I think is really
Yeah.
interesting, because it's not just the stories that we have about women that can be mistold or untold or whatever. It's also how we perceive them, and how like even as women, we internalize a lot of disregard for ourselves. I never was interested. I don't care about sports, period, but I was even less interested in women's sports, and I never questioned why. Right? It was just, oh well, women are not as good as men. Why would I watch women's hockey when I can watch men's hockey? I would never watch any hockey, to be honest. But like, it's just like, why would I watch women at all? And it turns out women's sports are actually more interesting. If I was going to watch sports, I'd watch women's sports, because it's just, but we don't question these things. Like, I'm going to go off on a slight tangent here, but I'm just, and a slight nerd tangent. I'm just rewatching the '90s series of Star Trek: Next Generation, and the very first season was purported as being so full of equality and all of that, and it's very clear that the writers don't know how to write women. They don't know what makes a woman exist, what motivates her, what's special about her. They're very, very stereotyped. And even in one episode, they went to a planet where it was run by women, and the men were the second class, and everybody, in the Enterprise was tittering at the thought of men being second class, and that's in the '90s. That's 30 years ago. And this is stuff where when I watched, I was like, oh my gosh, this is so advanced back in the 90s. And now I'm looking back on it with 2025 eyes and education by Fee Marks and paying attention to how the stories of women are told and how women are set aside and disregarded, even in so-called advanced or inclusive stories.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, it has to almost, and it has to evolve, and that's why we are nowhere near where we should be. If we are going to look at the equality agenda, you know, there's no way, I remember saying, I mean, this is before I'd even picked up a paintbrush, that I was going to write a book back in the 80s and 90s called The Big Con, which is basically that as a generation, that our generation of women, we were basically told, oh, you're so lucky, you can have it all, you can do this, that, and the other. And but in fact, we ended up becoming so frustrated because we were still expected to not only bring in an income and be successful at work and be successful in our own rights, but still do all the housework and bring up the kids and be the main provider. And so we were basically back in the 80s and 90s completely conned into thinking that we had to do everything. So you ended up just feeling very, very dissatisfied because you couldn't do everything. And I remember when I had my child, it was like I was made to feel terrible in the workplace because I couldn't put in the hours. I mean, I was a single parent. I couldn't put in the hours that I'd done as a single woman. And that wasn't understood. It was just, you were just made to feel like shit, that you weren't doing your job properly and that you weren't as good as you had been when you had no other distractions. And yet there's huge amount of pressure on women to have children. It's like,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I think that's still, when I speak to younger women today, it's still the case.
It's absolutely still the case for sure. I mean, I remember when my ex went on paternity leave, which in Canada was a new thing for men to be able to take time off work, and he was mocked for it. And we had our second kid in 2004. So my ex took paternity leave in 2005. That was only 20 years ago,
Yeah.
and he was outwardly and mocked so hard he ended his paternity leave early and went back to work and left me holding the bag. So like it was just, yeah.
Oh, my ex-husband, well, I say 2005, I had my baby. I think they were entitled to 2 weeks paternity leave in the UK. He didn't take it all.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
know.
it's tough. I mean, the things that the stories that you paint and the information that you share when you paint obviously relates to how things are in the real world as well. And you're educating through your passion of retelling the stories, which I find, I mean, everything's interconnected. How we live our lives and how we perceive each other and how we perceive ourselves and our places. It's all interconnected through the stories of women. So
Exactly.
yeah,
And
yeah.
and it's a bit like, even some of the what if I'm looking at myths, people have sort of said, oh, it's like fantasy, and it's like, but it's not fantasy because this is real. And mythology about women and whatever, it's like that series I did about women who transform into animals. It's like that's what women talked about, the escaping. How could we get out of the drudgery of our life where we've got no money, we're just trying to put food on the table, we're trying to do this and the other. Well, what about if we all got together and we all changed into seals or horses and just ran riot at night time, where we don't have those pressures? And I always sort of say, well, if you think about women who get together and are having a bottle of wine round a kitchen table, they start telling their stories, and that's where these stories came from.
Hmm. Yeah, I was in a witchy store recently, and they were saying that they didn't kill witches, they killed women and labeled them as witches.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Anybody
Yeah,
who,
it was
mhm,
it was genocide.
yeah,
It wasn't.
femicide.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
So, you know, it's just because you called somebody a witch or you call somebody something else, it doesn't make it okay to kill them.
yeah, exactly, exactly. So it's really interesting. I love the series that you did with the women who became seals and horses and all of that. Like I love that transformative series. I love the one with the tree. I've forgotten what it's called already. I'm so sorry. Where the
That's all right. That's the one of the dryads.
Yes, yes. And the one thing that you didn't point out to your followers, and I think you should say here now so people can go and look at it, is what is the tree made up of?
It's made up of women. There are 7 women in the who actually make up the tree. You have to sort of look for them, but they are the bark of the tree and the branches. So yeah, they're sort of hidden in there, which is what women are, the tree of life.
Yeah. Yeah, we can't get very far without women. So, yeah.
Certainly not.
Yeah. So this passion of painting women and retelling the stories and sharing the stories, not just the art, but you actually retell the stories as well. So your audience who choose to do so become more educated and maybe have a bit bigger and larger worldview, has really driven your art. And as somebody who's a big believer in not just randomly creating art, but actually having a purpose and communicating. We all have things we want to say. And when you become intentional about it, I think it increases the power behind what you create and it strengthens your message. So the creating that you've been doing has been incredible to watch from the outside. How has it felt as an artist with your intentional stories and research and everything else?
I have to say, I think it's a bit all consuming, but in a good way. That's not in a negative way by any stretch of the imagination. It has become my life. I am always looking for books, I'm looking for articles, I'm looking for paintings that are inspiring, trying to find out as much as I can so I can then also retell the stories. And I just love doing it. Yeah, it's more than a passion. It's a way of life, and I'm so blessed to be able to do that and tell these stories.
And how lucky are we that we get to experience your art and your stories. So I'm going to wrap this up, but I want to thank you for sharing so deeply about your passion and views and all that, and also to thank you for helping me see where I wasn't questioning what I thought was just normal. So it pays to pay attention to artists and artists' messages. It pays to question things, but even more so, it pays to follow Feemark's art. Her URL will be in the show notes, but feemarks-art.co.uk is where all the fun is at.
Thank you, Paula.
Thank you very much, Fee. This has been fun, and we'll be back with another episode of Fee and Paula talk about art in Art Crush. So stay tuned as we continue onward.